Drake Carrion stood in the towering entrance of the Vorrn'tal celestial citadel, his grip firm on his plasma rifle as his boots clinked against the crystal floor. The air hummed with alien technology, the walls shimmering like frozen starlight. The Queen's palace was a masterpiece of art and engineering, but it felt more like a gilded cage. This wasn't his first alien world, but it was the first time he'd been hired to protect a monarch, especially one as controversial as Queen Chirr'Zakk. "You seem tense, Terran," remarked Ambassador Zeren, his translucent blue skin reflecting the light of the glowing prisms overhead. Drake glanced at him, his sharp brown eyes betraying his unease. "Tense doesn't begin to cover it," he replied. "Places like this don't need guys like me, unless someone's looking for a fight." Zeren gave a melodic laugh. "A precaution, I assure you. Though the Queen has a talent for drawing attention and enemies." Drake nodded. He had read the reports. Queen Chirr'Zakk was a polarizing figure in the Vorrn'tal Empire, known for her radical attempts to unite her divided people and build alliances with alien species. It was exactly the kind of idealism that got people killed. The grand crystalline doors opened, and Drake followed Zeren into the throne room. The chamber was otherworldly, its walls alive with shifting patterns of light, as though they held the cosmos itself. At the center, seated on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, was Queen Chirr'Zakk. She was striking. Her emerald green skin glowed faintly, her flowing crimson hair cascading like molten fire, and her silver eyes shone with intelligence and power. She didn't rise when they entered, but tilted her head slightly, studying him with a gaze that felt like it could strip him to his core. "Welcome, Ambassador Zeren," she said, her voice a rich melody that filled the room. "And this is your Terran protector?" "Drake Carrion," Zeren introduced. Drake gave a curt nod, his military instincts keeping him formal. "Your Majesty." The Queen smiled faintly, though her expression remained inscrutable. "I hope you're as capable as the ambassador claims, Mr. Carrion." Before he could answer, a subtle shift in the room caught his attention. The shimmering walls seemed to distort slightly, and a faint ripple in the air made his instinct scream. "Get down!" he roared, lunging toward the Queen. A plasma bolt tore through the space where she'd been seated moments before, shattering her throne into a cascade of crystalline shards. Drake rolled to his feet, rifle raised, and fired in one fluid motion. The camouflaged assassin flickered into view as the first shot disrupted their cloaking field. The second struck home, sending the figure crashing to the floor. The room erupted into chaos. Guards surged forward, their energy weapons drawn. But Drake remained planted firmly in front of the Queen, his rifle sweeping the room for additional threats. "Secure the chamber," barked one of the guards. Chirr'Zakk stood gracefully, brushing crystal dust from her gown. Despite the near-death experience, her composure was unshaken. She stepped toward Drake, her silver eyes locking onto his. "You saved me," she said, her voice calm but tinged with something unspoken. "Just doing my job," Drake replied, his tone clipped. But the Queen shook her head. "No, it is more than that. You've invoked an ancient law, Mr. Carrion. By saving the life of the Vorrn'tal monarch, you are entitled to a single wish, anything within my power to grant." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the guards froze, their expressions a mix of disbelief and alarm. Drake's brow furrowed. "I don't need a reward." "You misunderstand," Chirr'Zakk said, her tone hardening. "It is not a reward, it is a binding tradition. To refuse would shame the throne and your people." Drake hesitated, his gaze flicking to Zeren, who gave him a subtle nod. This wasn't a choice. "Anything I want?" Drake asked, his voice cautious. "Anything," she confirmed, though her expression warned him not to push his luck. Drake considered his options. Wealth? Technology? A pardon for humanity's messy reputation in galactic politics? But as his gaze lingered on the Queen, an idea formed. A wild, reckless idea that no one would expect. "I wish," he said, his voice steady, "to be at your side, Your Majesty, as an equal." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Chirr'Zakk's regal mask faltered for a split second, her silver eyes widening in shock before narrowing dangerously. "You dare?" she hissed, her emerald skin darkening in what Drake guessed was their equivalent of a blush. "You offered me a wish," Drake said, standing firm. "I'm cashing it in." The tension in the room was electric. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, and Zeren looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. Calithra's jaw tightened, but tradition left her no room to maneuver. "Guards," she said through gritted teeth, "escort Mr. Carrion to my chambers. We will discuss this audacity privately." Drake caught Zeren's horrified expression as the guards flanked him. He could practically hear the ambassador's thoughts. Only a Terran would be this insane. As he was led away, Drake allowed himself a small, defiant smile. Humanity hadn't gotten this far by playing it safe. The royal chambers of the Vorrn'tal Celestial Palace were breathtaking. If you didn't mind being reminded of your insignificance in the universe. Drake stood in the center of the main hall, the crystal walls pulsing with faint bioluminescence. The air was warm and fragrant, like an alien garden, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. Queen Calithra swept into the room, her crimson hair flowing behind her like a comet's tail. Her expression was a mask of restrained fury, and her silver eyes gleamed with intensity. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she demanded, her voice low but cutting. Drake stood at ease, his military instincts preventing him from fidgeting under her glare. "Claimed my wish, Your Majesty, exactly as your laws allow." "Don't play coy with me," she snapped, circling him like a predator stalking its prey. "Do you understand what your wish implies? By our traditions, you have not merely asked for my time or my favor. You've asked for a position at my side, as my equal. That is a station earned only by the most trusted of my people. And yet, I'm here," Drake said simply. Calithra stopped, her eyes narrowing. "You think this is some Terran display of bravado, don't you? A stunt to prove your kind's infamous arrogance." Drake shook his head. "I'm not here to play games. I made my wish because I saw something in you. A strength no one else seems to notice because they're too busy bowing." Calithra's lips parted, caught off guard by his bluntness. "You think flattery will get you far?" "It's not flattery," Drake said, his tone softening. "I know what it's like to carry the weight of leadership. You're trying to hold an empire together, and you've put yourself in the crosshairs to do it. That takes guts. I respect that." Her expression faltered, just for a moment, before the queen in her reasserted control. "Even if I accept your ridiculous reasoning, what makes you think you're qualified to stand beside me? You're a soldier, an outsider to my people, my culture, my throne." "That's exactly why I'm qualified," Drake countered. "You don't need someone who'll agree with you on everything. You need someone who'll challenge you when you're wrong, fight for you when others won't, and remind you that you're not alone." For a long moment, Calithra was silent. Her silver eyes searched his face, as though trying to decipher a puzzle she hadn't expected to encounter. Finally, she sighed. "You are audacious, Terran, perhaps recklessly so." "I've been told that," he said with a faint smile. "But," she continued, her tone sharp, "you've also bound yourself to a storm you don't fully understand. My throne is not a prize, it's a target. My people are divided, my enemies numerous. You've tied your fate to mine, and it will not end as neatly as your Terran victories." Drake shrugged. "Life's never neat, but if I'm going to fight, it's going to be for something that matters." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. "You may regret that sentiment, Mr. Carrion." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I doubt it." The next day, the Vorrn'tal High Council convened in an emergency session. The chamber was vast, a circular arena where holographic images of each counselor loomed like celestial judges. At the center stood Queen Calithra, regal and composed, with Drake at her side. The murmurs from the council were a storm of indignation. "A Terran consort?" one counselor spat. "This is a disgrace. How can we trust an outsider with the affairs of our people?" another demanded. Drake stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't here to argue. This was Calithra's battlefield. The queen raised a hand, and the room fell silent. Her voice rang out, clear and commanding. "By our laws, the life of the monarch is bound to the traditions of the Vorrn'tal people. Drake Carrion saved my life, and in doing so, invoked the right of bonded wills. To refuse his wish would be to dishonor the laws that have guided us for millennia. But, Your Majesty, one of the counselors protested, those laws were meant to unite Vorrelians, not bind us to alien influences. Calithra's gaze hardened. And yet those same laws were crafted with wisdom far greater than ours. They understood that unity could not be built on fear or isolation. We must evolve, or be left behind. The council erupted into more debate, but Drake noticed a few of the holographic figures nodding in quiet agreement. As the session adjourned, Calithra turned to Drake, her voice low. That was only the beginning. The court will push back, harder than ever. Let them, Drake said. I've faced worse. She arched an eyebrow. You've never faced Vorrelian politics, Terran. I assure you, it's far more dangerous than war. Later that night, Drake was patrolling the palace when he felt it again. That faint distortion in the air, like the one before the assassination attempt. He stopped, his rifle raised, and scanned the corridor. The faint hum of cloaking tech reached his ears just before the first plasma bolt streaked past him. Nice try, he muttered, diving for cover. The attackers were skilled, their movements fluid and precise. But Drake had spent years in combat zones, and this wasn't his first ambush. He took down one, then another, the echoes of his rifle shots reverberating through the palace. As the last attacker fell, Calithra appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by guards. Her expression was a mix of anger and concern. What happened? She demanded. Drake lowered his weapon. Another assassination attempt. Looks like someone's not thrilled about our arrangement. Calithra's silver eyes blazed. This is no longer an isolated act. Someone within the palace is aiding them. Drake nodded grimly. Then we find out who, and remind them what happens when they underestimate us. The Vorrelian royal palace was supposed to be the safest place in the galaxy, yet Drake couldn't shake the feeling that the enemy was closer than anyone dared admit. The failed assassination attempt left behind clues, too many, almost as if someone wanted them to follow a trail. Calithra stood at the edge of her private study, staring out at the sprawling crystalline city below. The reflection of her silver eyes in the glass revealed her turmoil, but her posture was unyielding. Whoever planned this had access to the palace, she said, her voice taut. They knew the patrol routes, the timing of my movements. Drake leaned against the doorway, his rifle slung over his shoulder. And they knew when I'd be alone. They wanted you isolated. She turned to him, her crimson hair catching the room's faint glow. Do you think it's one of my counselors? Drake crossed his arms. It's possible, but too obvious. Whoever's behind this is trying to destabilize your rule. Hitting the council directly would have the opposite effect. No, they want you looking over your shoulder, paranoid, isolated. If they can make you doubt everyone around you, they've already won half the battle. Calithra's gaze lingered on him. And what do you suggest, Terran? He stepped forward, his expression serious. We draw them out. Make them think their plan is working. The next morning, the palace was abuzz with a calculated leak. News of Queen Calithra's weakened security spread through unofficial channels, planted carefully by Zeren under Drake's guidance. We're baiting a trap, Drake had explained, but it has to look real. Whoever's behind this needs to believe they've got a clear shot. Calithra had reluctantly agreed, though the tension between them grew with every step of the plan. Pretending to be vulnerable meant placing herself at risk, and despite her confidence in Drake, she wasn't used to relinquishing control. That evening, a grand reception was held in the palace's largest hall, a gathering of dignitaries and nobles from across the Vorrelian Empire. Drake was stationed at Calithra's side, his presence a clear statement. The Terran wasn't going anywhere, but his eyes were always moving, scanning for threats. It didn't take long. A flicker of movement near the ceiling caught Drake's attention. His hand went to his sidearm, and he signaled discreetly to the guards. Stay calm, he murmured to Calithra. She stiffened but obeyed, her composure flawless as ever. A figure dropped from the rafters, their energy blade gleaming, aimed straight for the queen. Drake moved faster than anyone expected, tackling Calithra to the ground as the blade sliced through the space where she'd stood moments before. The guards swarmed the attacker, but Drake's focus was on the queen. Are you hurt? he asked, his voice low. I'm fine, she replied, her breath shallow, but this was too bold. They wouldn't attack so openly unless... Her words were cut off as an explosion rocked the hall. The blast threw Drake and Chirr'Zakk against a nearby column, shattering crystalline decor and filling the room with smoke. Alarms blared, and the once dignified reception turned into chaos as panicked guests scrambled for safety. Drake helped Chirr'Zakk to her feet, scanning the room for threats. This wasn't about killing you, he said. It was a distraction. For what? She asked, steadying herself. He pointed toward the far end of the hall, where armed attackers in cloaking suits were taking over the control panels embedded in the walls. They're after the palace's defense grid. If they take control, they can lock us in. Or worse, turn the systems against us. Chirr'Zakk didn't hesitate. We have to stop them. Drake nodded, leading her toward the attackers while signaling the guards to secure the guests. The fight was brutal. The attackers were well-trained and equipped with advanced tech, but Drake's battlefield instincts and Chirr'Zakk's agility made them a formidable pair. As the last attacker fell, Drake accessed the control panel. The defense grid systems had been partially overridden, but he managed to lock them out before they could finish. It's not over, he said grimly, scanning the attacker's gear. This tech, it's not Vorrn'tal. Someone's supplying them. Chirr'Zakk knelt beside one of the unconscious attackers, her expression dark. This symbol, she said, pointing to a faint insignia etched into their armor. It belongs to the Obsidian Syndicate. Drake's jaw tightened. The Obsidian Syndicate was a shadowy faction that thrived on chaos, profiting from wars and political upheaval. If they were involved, the conspiracy ran far deeper than anyone had anticipated. The intercepted data from the attackers led Drake and Chirr'Zakk to an unlikely suspect, one of her trusted advisors, Counselor Vale. The evidence was damning, a series of encrypted transmissions linking Vale to Syndicate operatives. Chirr'Zakk summoned the council for an emergency session. The air was thick with tension as she presented the evidence. Counselor Vale, she said, her voice cold. You stand accused of conspiring with the Obsidian Syndicate to destabilize this throne. How do you plead? Vale, a wiry Vorrn'tal with calculating eyes, remained calm. I plead innocent, Your Majesty. This is a fabrication, no doubt orchestrated by those who fear my influence. Drake stepped forward, holding up a hollow display of the intercepted transmissions. We traced these directly to your private channels. Care to explain? Vale's composure cracked for a moment before he sneered. Do you think removing me will stop this? You're blind, all of you. The Syndicate's influence is everywhere, and your little Terran here has only made things worse. The galaxy will never accept a queen who consorts with humans. Before he could say more, guards restrained him. But his words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the challenges still ahead. In the aftermath of Vale's arrest, Chirr'Zakk addressed her people directly. A broadcast was sent across the Empire, showing her standing beside Drake in the throne room. My people, she began, her voice steady. We have faced treachery from within, but we will not falter. The path forward is not an easy one, but it is the right one. Unity is our strength, and together, we will build a future brighter than the stars. Drake watched her with quiet admiration, knowing the battle wasn't over. But they were ready. Together, they had faced darkness and emerged stronger. As the broadcast ended, Chirr'Zakk turned to him, her silver eyes softening. You've tied your fate to mine, Terran, she said. Do you regret it? Drake shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. Not for a second. They stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The arrest of Counselor Vale sent shockwaves through the Vorrn'tal Empire. While the Queen's bold stance against treachery earned her support among some factions, others grew more vocal in their dissent. Meanwhile, Drake had become a polarizing figure, a symbol of Terran audacity to some and an affront to Vorrn'tal tradition to others. But none of it mattered as much as the discovery they made during Vale's interrogation. Vale didn't just conspire with the Obsidian Syndicate, Drake told Chirr'Zakk as they reviewed the evidence in the palace's war room. He coordinated with other factions, alien groups we've never even heard of. This isn't just about destabilizing your rule. The Syndicate's building something bigger. Calithra's eyes narrowed as she studied the holographic map before them. The intercepted transmissions indicated syndicate activity across multiple systems, far beyond Vorrn'tal space. The locations formed a pattern, a web connecting key strategic points throughout the galaxy. "They're building a war machine," she said. Drake nodded grimly. "And they're hiding in places no one's thought to look." "Then we must act," Calithra said, "but not alone." The Queen summoned a coalition of allies, representatives from Terran fleets, Proximian diplomats, and even reluctant Vorrn'tal counselors. It was the largest gathering of interstellar leaders in decades, held in the palace's grand chamber. Calithra stood at the head of the assembly, her presence commanding. "We face a threat unlike any we've seen before," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "The Obsidian Syndicate thrives on division, manipulating our fears to turn us against each other. But fear will not rule us. Not today. We must stand united, or we will fall divided." Drake stood beside her, his Terran uniform a stark contrast to her flowing crystalline gown. He stepped forward, addressing the group. "I've seen what division does, how it destroys everything in its path. We have a chance to stop it here, together. It won't be easy, and it won't be pretty, but if we let the Syndicate win, we're signing our own extinction orders." The room erupted in debate, but slowly, alliances began to form. The Terrans offered military support, the Proximians pledged resources, and even skeptical Vorrn'tal leaders grudgingly committed troops. Calithra turned to Drake as the assembly adjourned. "You're good at this," she said with a faint smile. "Turns out yelling at stubborn people is a transferable skill," he replied. The coalition's intelligence efforts eventually led them to a rogue planet on the edge of uncharted space. The planet, surrounded by violent storms and gravitational anomalies, was the perfect hiding place for the Syndicate's central base. As their fleet approached, Calithra stood on the bridge of the royal flagship, gazing out at the swirling storms. Drake stood beside her, his expression grim. "They know we're coming," he said. "Good," Calithra replied, her voice like steel. "Let them see the strength of a united galaxy." The battle began as the fleet pushed through the planet's defenses. Syndicate ships, sleek and deadly, swarmed the coalition forces, but the diverse strategies of the allied fleets proved their strength. Proximian energy shields protected Vorrn'tal capital ships, while Terran strike teams infiltrated Syndicate outposts. Drake and Calithra led one such strike team, descending onto the planet's surface amidst the chaos. The Syndicate's base was a fortress of dark metal, its architecture stark and menacing against the storm-laden skies. Inside, the corridors were a maze of traps and ambushes, but Drake's sharp instincts and Calithra's strategic mind kept them ahead of the enemy. They reached the control center, where the Syndicate's leader, a shadowy figure known only as Chirr'Zakk, waited for them. "You've come far," Chirr'Zakk said, his voice distorted by a mechanical mask. "But you're too late. The galaxy thrives on conflict. Even if you defeat me, you can't erase what we've built." "Maybe not," Calithra said, her voice cold, "but we can make sure it ends with you." The final confrontation was intense. Chirr'Zakk activated the base's self-destruct sequence, threatening to take the entire planet, and the coalition fleet above, with him. Drake and Calithra worked together, using the Vorrn'tal technology embedded in the Queen's gauntlet to override the sequence. Chirr'Zakk fought fiercely, but his overconfidence proved his downfall. Calithra's blade struck true, ending his reign of terror. As the base crumbled around them, Drake grabbed Calithra's hand, pulling her toward the extraction point. "We're not done yet," he shouted over the deafening explosions. The Syndicate's defeat was the first step toward lasting peace. The coalition's victory sent a clear message: unity was stronger than fear. Back on Vorrn'tal, Calithra addressed her people once more, this time with hope in her voice. "We have proven that our differences are not weaknesses but strengths," she said. "The Syndicate sought to divide us, but they only made us stronger. Together, we will forge a future brighter than the stars." Drake watched from the side, pride swelling in his chest. He had come to Vorrn'tal as a soldier, prepared to fight for someone else's cause. Now, he stood as a partner in something far greater. Later that night, as they stood on the palace balcony, Calithra turned to him. "You've changed everything," she said softly. Drake shook his head. We changed everything. Together. She smiled, leaning into him as they gazed at the stars. Above them, the sky shimmered, a galaxy reborn in the light of a new era.